Hey, everybody. The Flagship Podcast is back. It's back, and it's stronger than ever, folks. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined by my new co-host on the Flagship Podcast, the one and only Eric Henry, star new reporter for Horns247.com. E. Henry, how you doing, man?
First off, you're way too kind with the star new reporter, but I will gladly take all of the accolades that you will throw my way, CB. It is a pleasure and an honor to be on the Flagship Podcast with you. I've had a chance to watch and listen to this podcast when it was yourself and the illustrious Miss Taylor Estes. So I cannot fill her shoes, her heels, but I can only try my best to step in here and be a figment of what she was. But I'm thrilled and ecstatic to be part of the 24/7 sports team, Horns 24/7 team, and be talking to you, talking a little Horns football.
All right. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear your melodic tones. So you might want to move your microphone a little bit closer to yourself because we want to make sure that everybody can hear every word that you have to say.
Should be a little better now.
We have a lot to get into, Eric. We are 2 scrimmages into fall camp for the Texas Longhorns, and the biggest news, folks, is no significant injuries. No significant injuries, okay? So that's probably the biggest and most important news we're going to talk about all through this podcast. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but there's probably nothing more important than that, because last year at this time, Texas had already lost Isaiah Nayer to a knee injury, and Junior Angelau, who was a starting guard on the offensive line, who's now transferred out of the program, he was also lost to a season-ending knee injury. So the fact that the Texas Longhorns are healthy, Eric, is significant. Now, they've got obviously got more camp to go. We don't open the season until September 2nd against the Rice Owls. JT Daniels, by the way, quarterbacking the Rice Owls, the third time he's going to face the Texas Longhorns in Austin, representing a different team. First it was USC, then he went to Georgia, but then West Virginia, he faced Texas last year. And then here with the Rice Owls. So JT Daniels, folks. But anyway, Texas healthy, Eric, that is significant.
Yeah, Chip, no doubt about it. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at, who the competition is. If you are not healthy, it's really going to undermine your chances for success. And I think when you talked about it a little bit last year, entering last year, how the team went into it banged up. And Steve Sarkisian talked about it a couple times in the press availabilities that we've had him, right? He's talked about the fact that coming out of each scrimmage, the first thing he emphasizes is no injuries. The fact that last year they went into it with some injuries, and the fact that this year seemingly the number one goal is just to get to Rice healthy and, playing good football. So I think you make, really a kind of succinct points there. But what's interesting, Chip, in my mind is, do you feel, I'm just want to throw this back at you, get your thoughts, right? It feels like more than ever this year in recent memory, this team is equipped, for lack of a better phrase, to handle whatever bumps or bruises that may come their way through camp. Given, I know you've talked about a lot, you've touched on it a fair amount of times in your insider, the amount of depth that this team appears to be building. So I just want to throw that back at you in the form of a question. Does it seem that this year, in relation to maybe years in the past, that this team is more equipped to handle whatever bumps and bruises may come their way?
Yeah, now this is the reach for the Tums portion of the show, because Texas fans have been so battered and bruised with expectation, high hopes, excitement, all dashed, kick to the groin, banana in the tailpipe, however you want to describe it. So the fact that Steve Sarkisian is saying we are better equipped to handle, you don't want to say the word, but if someone has to come out of a game, they're better equipped to handle that with depth. And he said we're plenty talented. And he's said that he likes that they could win in a variety of ways, he says, that they're not just limited to winning one certain way. And so all of this just the Kool-Aid, whatever you want to call it, it starts to taste really good. But we got to see how it really tastes. I mean, like, it tastes good in our mind, the Kool-Aid, but we haven't tasted it yet. We're like picturing the Kool-Aid, and it looks good. It's burnt orange. It's, hopefully the sugar mix is just right, because you don't want it to be flat. But bottom line is there's a lot of Kool-Aid to drink right now. And I think when you talk about depth, you talk about Steve Sarkisian saying they can win in a variety of ways. I look at the offense, I say having two deep threats, at least two. I think Steve Sarkisian would say he probably has four. When you look at A.D. Mitchell on one side of the field and Xavier Worthy on the other side of the field, or Isaiah Nayer on one side of the field and Jonte Cook on the other side of the field, Jordan Whittington in the slot, Jatavian Sanders at tight end, that's going to add so much dimension to this offense that I don't think we saw last year. And it made it harder to run, and it made it harder to, get JT Sanders open, because they could crowd him and double Worthy. They didn't really respect the third receiver, in the equation. Casey Kane, no offense to Casey Kane, and I hear he's having a good camp, but my gosh, A.D. Mitchell is all anyone's talking about. So it is. There is reason to believe, Eric, that there's depth and that Texas could actually survive if someone had to come off the field. Now, you and I can talk about which positions maybe we feel better about if someone had to come off the field, and maybe a couple that you're like, man, they cannot have that guy come off the field. Jatavian Sanders probably at tight end, although Gunnar Helm is having a great camp, and the guy's pissed off, and he wants some targets because he's working his ass off, and he blocks probably better than JT Sanders, but JT Sanders is a freak athlete who makes great contested catches. I mean, that's a good debate, actually, which positions Texas is better equipped to handle if someone has to come off the field at this point in camp. What would you say?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because if we're going to compare running back, for example, to tight end, I'm going to go ahead and say it. I feel a little bit more confident in the tight end position right now, if for no other reason. I feel like maybe we've seen, Texas fans, yourself, Chip, what Gunnar Helm can bring, right? So maybe while he hasn't had the pass targets that JT Sanders has had, and that's a byproduct of the offense, at least seemingly, I mean, you're talking about a 3-star kid who came in the same class as JT, right? And is adequate as a run blocker. He at least brings one dimension of that game that you can turn to and say, okay, if JT, for whatever reason, knock on wood, he's out, we can go to Gunnar Helm, who Jeff Banks and Steve Sarkisian has said is a more improved, more athletic player. Maybe you can use him in the pass game a little bit, but you got an adequate run blocker there. You can go, if you want to choose and go to the run game, you can. But in terms of the backs, listen, I mean, it sounds like JB's having a really good camp. Everyone's been really high on CJ Baxter, the freshman from Orlando, my neck of the woods, but we haven't seen it yet, right? So that might be a little bit of a hot take on my part, but I feel at this point in the game, if we're going to compare, say, running back to tight end, in my mind, I think those are the two spots, at least offensively speaking, you have a little bit concern of, as far as not having that depth. I feel a little bit more confident in the tight end position personally. I mean, we've even heard Jeff Banks talk about Juan Davis, saying if he can just avoid those soft tissue injuries and stay healthy, maybe you got a guy there as well. So CB, I'll throw it back at you and say, between those two, I would say I feel a little more confident in the tight end position than maybe the running back, just because we haven't seen it yet. But I'm sure that tees you up to talk about a guy like Keelan Robinson, who from all accounts is really busting his butt and wanted to find his role in the offense as well.
I thought one thing that was really telling, because I've written in the Insider that people want to know what's going on with Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue's really talented, but he's got to pick it up in the blitz pickup and pass protection. And I asked Steve Sarkisian last week, who's your best back in pass pro and blitz pickup? And he said, we have 3. And he almost said, or 4, but he stopped himself and he said, we have 3. And he said, Jonathan Brooks, CJ Baxter, and Keelan Robinson. And that pretty much backs up what I've been reporting all along in the Insider, that's going to be your your 1-2 punch with your change of pace. Jonathan Brooks, CJ Baxter are your big backs who can catch, tough guys who are going to, be able to run between the tackles. And then Keelan Robinson is your space guy, we just speed sweep, quick passing game. The guy is a catch and run nightmare matchup wise. So, that's where I think we are. I think that's a position that everyone wants to know. And I've said, to me, the offensive line is going to have a big say in how successful these running backs are, because Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson, a lot of times last year had guys in the hole and had to make a miss, and did. This year, we've heard in camp that the defensive line, which is a very disruptive group to say, has made it tough to run between the tackles because lanes are getting canceled and backs are having to bounce stuff outside. And that's like that there's a little cringe factor there, because that's the one part of the offense that you want to know that Steve Sarkisian is committed to, that he can rely on, like he did last year at times to finish off the Iowa State game, finish off the Kansas State game, finish off the Baylor game, dominate the entire Kansas game with the running game, but then gave up on the run against TCU, gave up on the run in the fourth quarter against Oklahoma State. And you just, the teams that have a chance to win a national championship or conference championship, Eric, are the teams that are dynamic in the running game, teams that can get the yard or the 2 yards in short yardage and goal line with the running game. And I've pointed to that first and goal from the 2 against TCU in the third quarter, where Bijan Robinson didn't get a touch and they ended up with a field goal, and you're like, ugh. And then they had first and goal from the 5 in the fourth quarter and didn't punch it in for a touchdown. Bijan Robinson didn't get a touch. And that's the part of the offense that is, I don't have any concern about Quinn Ewers throwing the football down the field to A.D. Mitchell, Worthy, Nayer, Cook, Whittington, JT Sanders, Gunnar Helm. My concern is Texas going to be able to run it when they want to run it on their terms, even when the defense knows they want to run it?
Chip, and again, I'm having to form some of these things to you in the form of a question, having not covered this team last year. But I wrote a piece recently for Horns 24/7 talking about the power running game, right? And really broke down the numbers.
Good piece. Everybody needs to read that.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. There's a difference between having, successful run plays on 1st and 10 and 2nd, whatever, right? When you've got a 50-50 shot of it could be a run or a pass. But when everybody in the stadium knows you got to run the football, right? And those yards are those situations are defined as 3rd and 3 or 4th and 3 or less. Can you go there and pick up the yards? So like I said, I'm having to form this to you and phrase it to you in the form of a question, but I guess I'm curious, did Steve Sarkisian just go away from it? When I crunched those numbers, Chip, what caught me by surprise, and I wish I actually had them here directly on me, but the number of times that Steve Sarkisian chose to throw in those scenarios. And was it a matter of him just choosing to abandon it because of a lack of success? As you talked about, the interior of the offensive line being one of the question marks entering this year. And, you've talked about some of the positions that are up for grabs, like a guy like DJ Campbell, maybe a true road grader at 6'3", 343, him getting a chance. Was it a situation where the offensive line wasn't opening up those holes? Or was it, Steve Sarkisian just equally accountable and saying maybe he just went away from it? I mean, they could be one and the same, but I'm curious your thoughts there, because I found those numbers really interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I think bringing in a guy like Paul Chryst, a power run, guru from Wisconsin during his days as the head coach at Wisconsin, I thought was a great move, because Chryst is a guy who prides his team in being able to run it in those situations when everyone in the stadium knows we're going to run it, because there are different ways you can run it. You can run power, you can run counter, you can run zone scheme. And that's where I would think Steve Sarkisian is getting with Paul Chryst and Kyle Flood and saying, okay, what do Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter and Keelan Robinson and Jaden Blue do the best? And so that when we're in the opponent red zone or we've got first and goal from the 2, what's our A, B, C, and D running plays? And, what do we do best? And that's where I felt like Steve Sarkisian, I don't want to say he was kind of scrambling or he was unsure at times. And that's where I think if they're going to be a true championship caliber team, they've got to know, okay, it's 3rd and 2 and we're going to get these 2 yards, even if we have to run 2 plays to get it. But here are the plays we're going to run. And that's part of it, is knowing what offensive lineman you want to run behind. Do you have a great puller? Are we doing pin and pull? Are we doing, gap scheme? What do we do best? And that's what fall camp is all about. And so we won't know until we see it in that situation, probably September 9th in Tuscaloosa. But that's what I'm most fascinated by, because they, obviously they lose the Oklahoma State game, a game they should have won. They were up 14, 31-17, could have run the ball in the 4th quarter to finish off that game. Didn't. It got away, cost them the Big 12 title game. And then the TCU, they go to K-State the next week, win. Great win. To me, it's the best win of the Sarkisian era. I know everyone's going to say, 49-0 over OU. Davis Bevel at quarterback for OU, that was a gift to Texas fans. So, then they go to K-State, they win that game. Bijan runs it 32 times, 209 yards, and they needed every yard of it. But Quinn Ewers, people forget, Quinn Ewers played a great first half, threw 2 touchdowns to Xavier Worthy. Then there were turnovers in the second half. You had Roschon Johnson, who never fumbles, get the ball punched out from behind. Worthy had a fumble that killed 2 possessions. It turned into a tight game. Texas wins. The next week, they're coming home to play TCU for everything. You got a home game against the number 1 team in the conference, and you can't run the ball. Like, TCU, their defense was good. It wasn't that good. Like, Iowa State's run defense was better than TCU's. People ran the ball on TCU last year. Texas couldn't move them inch. And that was what was so frustrating. Now, some would say, TCU might have had Texas signals. They had Wiley, the tight end, who's a transfer from Texas, and maybe he, and I've reported that Texas has changed all their signals this offseason, and it was a grind. Like, during the summer, they totally changed all their signals from the sideline. The players had to learn the whole new, all of it. Now they're fine with it, but Texas wants to make sure there's no I's, undotted or T's uncrossed as they try to make this push for a conference championship. So it's going to be fascinating. But yeah, that power running, short yardage. I want to see Steve Sarkisian believe in his offensive linemen, because those guys want to run block. No offensive lineman wants to pass block. They don't want to go backward. They don't mind doing it in spots or when you're mixing run and pass and you got the defense off balance, but they want to be able to run it and fire off and hit somebody. So how committed are they? How much do they believe in that new interior offensive line? Like you mentioned, DJ Campbell, probably going to be the right guard starting the season, 343 pounds. He gets his hands on you. Can he just run you backwards and create holes? And I can't wait to see it, because they did not try to run it in the Alamo Bowl and they got smoked. And that can't be the way of the world without Bijan and Roschon Johnson.
No, again, you hit the nail on the head. There's no doubt about it. Just want to add one final thought on that I thought was interesting. And I really would like your thoughts on this as well, because I think you touched on it a little bit in your explanation of the run game. I asked offensive coordinator Kyle Flood, hey, with this year's group, do you think there's one thing that they block best? Is it the zone game? Is it the, gap scheme? What is it, right? And he said, well, we think we block everything best, right? And I guess you could say that's the coach speak answer, but I followed up with the second part of that question being, how does that play a factor in the running back competition, right? Because if you have a Jonathan Brooks, who you go back and look at his numbers last year, was pretty similar to Bijan Robinson, and a lot of it was half zone, half gap. Does that play a factor in who's doing what? But I want to throw this back to you in the form of a question. I think it's interesting. He said that, hey, we recruit all talented backs at Texas, and we think they should all be able to do X, Y, and Z things. And I think that's, again, the company line. But as you talked about, you got to have a guy on 4th and 2. You can't try out multiple backs, right, in the short yardage game and say, hey, said Baxter, here's a shot. Savion Red, here's a shot. JB, here's a shot. How important do you think it is, Chip, in your mind, to have a guy? Sure, you want to have multiple backs who can do it, but on 3rd and 2, 4th and 2, this is the guy we know we're turning to who's going to get us those 2-3 yards.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, you've got, like I just described those two instances in the TCU game. You got 1st and goal from the 2, 1st and goal from the 5. Bijan Robinson doesn't get a touch. Like, man, Roschon Johnson ran it for a 2-yard loss on 1st down in the 1st and goal from the 2 situation. Probably wasn't blocked the way it needed to be blocked. But that's the part of it that you need to know and we need to see. And we probably won't see it when it's crunch time until September 9th in Tuscaloosa. But yeah, you need to have that. You need to know. You need to know this is our guy. This is the play. He does best on this counter play. Because it's early in the season, hopefully you don't have to show much against Rice. Heck, you could even, you've got some freshmen you might be able to use as X factors in that game against Alabama. We'll see. Now, I mean, a guy like Jonte Cook, a guy like Ryan Niblett, do you have a little fly sweep or something, that you've never shown on film? You save that for Alabama, but you got to know. You got to know what your guys do best. I mean, when Texas was winning conference championships in 2005 and 2009, they were telling the opponent where they were running it. Like the quarterbacks, everyone was like, we're going to run it right there. Let's see if you can stop it. And they couldn't. And that's the level of confidence that this offense needs to get to. And, you got a new starter at right guard, and you hope it's an absolute upgrade. I've heard good things about DJ Campbell as a run blocker. The pass protection still needs work, but every young offensive lineman's pass protection needs work, except for guys like Calvin Banks Jr., who's just ridiculous savant at his position. But that's going to be a big part of the story for this Texas offense. One thing, Eric, when Steve Sarkisian's been at his best and he's had weapons, deep threats on both sides of the field with pass catchers underneath, he's really good at scripting the early plays and typically getting a good lead. Go back to the Alabama first half against Ohio State in the national championship when, Devontae Smith catches 12 passes in the first half, scores 3 touchdowns. Alabama built the lead in such a way that they were able to just kind of cruise in for a landing in that game. That's when Steve Sarkisian's at his best. What I want to see is the adjustments to the second half adjustments, because Texas last year and 21 struggled to hold on to leads. And I'm waiting to see, with the complete offense, with the deep threats that he wants on the outside to open things up underneath, the running game, the the running back passing game, all of it that Alabama did so well in 2020 to get 3 Heisman finalists off of that team. That's what I'm looking for this year, and the adjustments to the adjustments in the second half. And so, we're going to learn so much in that Alabama game on September 9th about what this Texas team is all about.
Chip, I'm taking a look at our itinerary that we sent over pregame here again, just taking some of the notes. And it's something you had here I think is interesting. You asked, what do we feel most confident about this team? And in my mind, just kind of going off that subject there, listen, I might be a sucker, Chip, but I feel really confident about this defensive line. I keep hearing about Alfred Collins. I know that having a 6'5", 317-pound defensive tackle with those type of measurables, in addition to a T'Vondre Sweat, in addition to a Byron Murphy, it's not going to hurt things. And everything we've heard from Steve Sarkisian is about how this, and the players as well, but how this defensive line is causing havoc. I think you were there that day when Jaron Thompson said they're mean and nasty, talking about this defensive line. I'm just going to throw that out there again. I might be a sucker, but I feel pretty confident in this defensive line. How about you?
Yeah, think about that for a second. The teams that have been winning national championships, Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, have had that defensive line play, dominant defensive line play. And that's such a big part of it, because you have to be able to disrupt the other team's running game and make it tough, force them into the throw game. And Texas on paper looks like they've got the guys to do it this year. And that to me is such a big part of the equation. And, T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, I saw them after practice the other day. And I said to him, man, sounds like you're making life miserable for the offensive line and the running game. And they're like, oh man, we're just doing what we do. But they said it in such a way with so much confidence, and they were just carrying themselves with so much confidence that if they play that way, then this Texas team has a chance to do some special things, because I do think there's talent behind that line. You've added Jalen Catalon at safety. You've got Jalen Ford at middle linebacker. I think Anthony Hill is going to be a problem for opponents, especially when he's getting after the quarterback. And at corner, you've got talented guys. We just got to see who's ready to turn it on when the lights come on, because Ryan Watts started every game at the boundary corner last year, but man, these last 2 scrimmages, you keep hearing about freshman Malik Muhammad. This guy's making plays all over the place. And I think coming into camp, we thought Terrence Brooks and Gavin Holmes were probably battling it out for the field corner position. And then in these scrimmages, it's been all Malik Muhammad, the freshman. So let's see. Obviously, in these scrimmages, you've had the 1 offense against the 2 defense and the 2 offense against the number 1 defense. But that means Malik Muhammad's making plays against the number 1 offense, unless he's, moving up into that position where he's playing with the 1s. So I think it's going to be, this defensive line is going to set the tone for this defense, and it needs to, because of all the guys you just mentioned. Byron Murphy, T'Vondre Sweat, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, they're all draft eligible after this season. And from what I'm hearing, they're treating it like a contract year. And that's what you want. You want guys to turn it on, whatever it takes to find that switch and turn it on. That's what you want. But in Trill Carter, another guy who's kind of under the radar, the transfer from Minnesota, who's 6'2", 300, really twitchy, gets off the ball really well. They play him head up on the center, and he's quick enough in both directions to really make life miserable as a head up shade on the center. So, this is what you want. You want to have multiple waves of guys. And then Sadir Mitchell, the freshman, who's, 3 335. And he's got size. He's got explosion. He needs to come on this year, because if all those guys end up having a great year and going pro, you're looking at some young guys stepping up next year, and that's, we'll see. Got to take things one at a time, but that defensive line is stacked.
Chip, something that you're really pronounced about asking Steve Sarkisian when we get him in presser, and I really like the approach, and whether it's him or the players, is some of the young guys we can keep an eye on, right? Because we got to have that next wave, next crop of guys coming up, and talking about the freshmen who are making an impact. Talk about that a little bit. There's one name, just sticking with the defense. It's the name that Texas fans probably salivating over his potential, and that is Anthony Hill. And since day one, every time you've asked that question, it feels like there's two things that I've heard consistently. One, it's whether it's Steve Sarkisian or Pete Kwiatkowski or whoever is saying they don't want to overload him, they don't want to give him everything day one. But how do you put a bridle on such talent? How do you put a bridle on such athleticism, such natural pass rush ability? So I do want to toss it back to you in that sense, and just talk about some of the freshmen that you've heard about who are making an impact. And I feel like you got to start with A. Hill, right?
Yeah, I mean, A. Hill, I've said he's kind of he's a mini Tony Brackens. Tony Brackens played at Texas in '93, had 12 sacks as a freshman. Now, he was special. He went on to be a Pro Bowl player in the NFL. He was a true defensive end. I mean, he's super long and bigger than Anthony Hill, but Anthony Hill has the same body type as Tony Brackens from an arm length standpoint, from a strength standpoint. And according to his teammates, the guy has a knack for getting his hands on the football, whether it's punching it out or swatting the ball out of a quarterback's hands. And I've said he could end up with more forced fumbles than sacks this year, but either way, you're going to take it, because anytime you get a freshman who's got that kind of ability as a pass rusher, but yet I think he and Lianga Lafau are going to be stars. Lianga will probably play middle. Anthony Hill will probably play a mix of weak and strong side linebacker because of the different things that he can do. But I think they are counting on Anthony Hill. I mean, how many times have we heard that Anthony Hill is among the top 1, 2, or 3 pass rushers on this team? And I think the guy just has it. I mean, when he was at Denton Ryan, his coaches, when he moved up to varsity as a sophomore and they won the state championship that year, and Jatavian Sanders was on that team, they just programmed him to see ball, hit ball, basically rush the passer. And he was so effective, and then they loaded him up with the defense and he became a complete linebacker. But Texas is doing the same thing with Anthony Hill this year. They're loading him up with these pass rush situations while expanding his game to become a complete linebacker. But I think that's how special they think he is as a pass rusher. And I think I can't wait to see what he can do, because the kid is fearless. I mean, he's not a freshman from a mindset standpoint.
Chip, what really impressed me is we talked to David Benda the other day, and of course he's a guy who, is in that competition, to play, outside linebacker. And I thought it was interesting. I guess we hear so much about A. Hill's pass rush ability that in your head, or at least maybe just me, I'm thinking that, all right, the kid is a natural pass rusher, natural nose for the ball, but maybe he might be a little bit deficient in coverage, right? Maybe that's going to be the thing that keeps him from being, if not a starter day one, someone who's going to get, time in those linebacker situations. And Benda said, no, he almost had a play the other day where he had a one-handed tip pick to himself. It's almost amazing in a sense, the athleticism, right? All you hear about is the pass rush ability. It's like, oh, no, yeah. He almost snagged one-handed pick. That in itself is just really, really interesting. Let's toss it back to the offensive side of the ball and a freshman who maybe because of the depth in the receiver room, he might not see a ton of time immediately, but is another name that every time you've asked that question, his name seems to be brought up, and that's Jonte Cook, right? I mean, Chip, do you see a role for him? I mean, I just think with so many offensive weapons, it might be tough for him to see a ton of time at receiver, but could you see, is there anything just kind of in his background and in Steve Sarkisian's history that you see some role for him, that his speed and athleticism is just too much to keep off the field on day one?
Well, if he's getting open and he's making plays, he's got to be on the field. And he's the heir apparent to Xavier Worthy. And all speculation is that Worthy has a big year this year, goes pro, and then Jonte Cook steps right into Xavier Worthy's role. So, but you're right. I mean, every time we turn around, Jonte Cook's making a play. And the thing that, again, he's a 5-star for a reason. His footwork, his route running is ahead of schedule. That's the way it was with Xavier Worthy. Worthy came in June, and by week 1, he was the centerpiece of the offense from a passing standpoint. He picked things up that fast. We're kind of hearing the same thing about Jonte Cook. Heck, this past week, we've heard the same thing about Derek Williams at safety, who was a June arrival. But Jonte was a early enrollee, came in January, and was, he caught a touchdown pass in the spring game and from Malik Murphy. And this guy, he's ready. I mean, all indications are he's ready. And that's where this thing's going to get interesting, Eric, because you kind of look at, A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy are your top 2 outside deep threats, Jordan Whittington in the slot. Then if we know Steve Sarkisian, he tends to play a limited number at receiver. Usually it's 4. I mean, last year it wasn't even 4, but is Jonte Cook going to beat out Isaiah Nair, or does Steve Sarkisian believe so much in these guys that he's willing to take A.D. Mitchell out and put Isaiah Nair in, take Worthy out, put Cook in, just to give him a breather? I mean, that's not been Steve Sarkisian's MO in the past, but let's see, because you got to feed the playmakers. And if they're making plays in practice and they're getting open, they deserve to be on the field. I mean, it's that simple if they can beat the defense. So I'm fascinated to see how deep that receiver rotation will be for Sarkisian this year.
Chip, as someone who covered this team last year, can I throw one thing out at you as far as the receiver room, just kind of bounce this off you? Because I find this really interesting, and we've talked about it, we've written about it on the site, the lack of deep ball success last year, right? And from talking with you guys and kind of doing some research, it sounds as if the difference between Xavier Worthy as a freshman and difference between him as a sophomore, you had the slight dip in counting stats, was that what he was asked to do. He was asked to kind of be that deep threat where, maybe that's not his strong suit. Maybe his strong suit is more getting the ball in his hands quickly and making plays. So just going to, throw a couple stats out at you and see what you make of them. Of the 39 passes that were 20 yards or more last year that Xavier Worthy was targeted, he only caught 9 of those passes, right? So again, not necessarily the most success in the deep ball game. Does a guy like Isaiah Nair with his size and A.D. Mitchell with his size, is it almost too challenging for Steve Sarkisian to keep those guys off the field, specifically Nair in relation to Cook with his size and downfield ability? When Nair was at Wyoming, he was an excellent deep ball threat. He caught over 40% of the deep ball passes 20 yards or longer that were targeted to him. Is that almost too much to keep him off the field? And the second part of that question, Chip, is does having a guy like Nair allow Xavier Worthy to do more of what he did as a freshman?
Yeah. I mean, I think you look at it and you say every quarterback loves a big receiver. They love it because they can just throw it up in their general vicinity, and they know that an A.D. Mitchell or Isaiah Nair is going to go up and get it. A.D. Mitchell 6'4", Isaiah Nair 6'3", long arms, big catch radius. The knock on Worthy, and I've been very open about this, is that he's not a great contested catch maker. And when he's running away from someone, he's fine. When he's got a DB on his hip and it's 50-50, I don't like my chances, because for whatever reason, Xavier Worthy hasn't shown. In fact, sometimes he kind of gave up on passes where he had a DB on his hip. So I agree with you. Now, Sarkisian loves Xavier Worthy, like loves him and strokes him all the time about how his work ethic. He's the first one to practice, last one to leave, hardest worker. He's done everything. And I'm going, I didn't see a guy fighting to catch the ball last year. Now, we find out after the season he had a broken bone in his hand. And so it's like, okay, the guy was clearly the deep threat. The defenses knew it. I'm sure he got tired of being double teamed and leveraged and all that. But I'm with you. Isaiah Nair, great deep ball threat. We saw it at Wyoming 2 years ago when he caught those 12 touchdown catches, had over 20 yards per catch. And we know A.D. Mitchell is a monster. We've seen it. We've seen it to win a college football playoff semifinal against Ohio State. So I think Steve Sarkisian's going to have to look at it real critically and say, who's making the contested catches? Who's the guy that we can count on the most to make these plays downfield? And it could be an interesting argument.
All right, CB, I know this is my first run with you here. I'm a little bit new to something, a little bit new to love it or leave it. I think we're going to go a little take it or leave it. Does that sound
take
about
it
right?
Or leave it.
All right, let's
take
go
it
a little,
or leave it.
Let's go a little take it or leave it here. I think
we should probably grab a quick break.
Oh yeah. Let's
for those who are we'll come right back to the Flagship Podcast with some take it or leave it. For those of you watching on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on with take it or leave it, E. Henry.
All right, Chip. So we're back. It's my first foray. I am a little excited here. We're going to go a little take it or leave it. Looks like the first take it or leave it question is, are we ready to buy the hype on Quinn Ewers?
You know, I think the kid has taken accountability for last year, probably even more than he needed to, with the apology to the fans after the spring game. I like the way that he's remade himself physically. He's at 200, down from 218, says he feels great, says he's changed his diet. He gave up Chick-fil-A for salmon, says his mind is clearer. And we hear that he connected with Xavier Worthy on about a 60-yard touchdown pass in the second scrimmage this past Saturday. I'm ready. I'm ready to buy the hype. I'm going to take this. I think the Texas quarterback room is loaded, and I think that Quinn Ewers knows that it's his time. And we've seen big second-year jumps from quarterbacks in the Sarkisian system. Alabama, Mac Jones, obviously went to a ridiculous, he had 41 touchdowns and 3 or 4 interceptions in that 2020 season, was a Heisman finalist. I think that's possible for Quinn Ewers. He's that talented, but this offensive line, this running game has to be able to complement what he's doing so that it's not all on him. And that's yet to be seen. But yeah, I'm going to take this, E. Henry. How about you?
CB, I'm going to take it, but can I give you 2 intangible things that I do concern me? Well, here's the one that concerns me. And I am curious your recollection of Texas quarterbacks, 200-pound quarterbacks, Chip.
I know.
That is something that, listen, this offensive line is going to have to keep them clean, going to have to keep them upright. They certainly are up to the challenge. You talk about it. Having a Kelvin Banks Jr. protecting your blind side doesn't hurt. But there's just something about that number, 200 pounds. When I heard it, it's like, on one sense, you can tell the kid is taking his diet seriously, as you talked about, drop the Chick-fil-A, doing salmon. But with that being said, that just feels very, very slight. So that's a concern. Now, to flip it and give on the optimistic side of things that I feels encouraging, and this is just an intangible thing. It's not something that, others might feel as strongly about, but I think it's something. The haircut. Because I think the haircut's more than a haircut, Chip. Right? You get a haircut and you become a new man, you become a new woman, a new person. It's a mentality thing, right? You're taking yourself seriously as the leader of this team. Something about that, even in talking with him, right? I mean, when he talks about the haircut, he kind of laughs and then he says, yeah, it was a personality change. It's a shift. I think there's something about that says he's ready to embrace the challenge of being the leader of this team. So I'm taking it, but those are two intangible things that really kind of jumped out to me, Chip, right? Am I making too much of that? Or what do you say?
Hey, man, you know what? I think you're right. It was a whole transformation for Quinn Ewers to cut the hair, cut the mullet, shave the face, get his body into shape. He was not used to being part of the problem. And he was part of the problem last year in his mind. And look, there were a couple of games, right? Oklahoma State, TCU, where it wasn't working. And he couldn't figure a way out of it, or Steve Sarkisian couldn't put him in position to figure a way out. And that's not what Quinn Ewers has ever been used to. When he was a sophomore at South Lake Carroll, in a junior, he was the one solving the problem and getting his team in position. And so I think he's hungry to make sure that never happens again. And I agree with you though, Eric, and I think it's a good point you make about 200-pound quarterbacks. Now, typically, if they're 200 pounds or, right there, they're usually pretty elusive and can avoid taking the big hit. But we saw Quinn Ewers take the big hit last year from Dallas Carter against Alabama. He drove his shoulder right into the turf, and Quinn missed the next 2.5 games with a sternoclavicular sprain. So, yeah, that is a concern. Malik Murphy at 6'9" or whatever he is, he's probably made out of polyurethane, and no one's going to drive his shoulder into the ground to the point where he's even going to feel it, because I don't think they can tilt him sideways like that. But that's a legit concern, and that means that offensive line's got to keep him clean and let him spin it, because I think he's hungry and ready to show everyone that he can spin it to these receivers.
All right, the next take it or leave it, CB. We touched on it a little bit, but let's go in depth. The defensive line is the strongest position group on the team. Take it or leave it, Chip.
Yeah, and I know this is a hot one. This is a hot button, hot take, whatever. Because everybody looks at the receiver group on this team and says, man, the receivers are the best position group on the team. And that's a legit argument. But I like the veteran experience and hunger of the group on the defensive line. When you talk about T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, these are all, 3-year or 4-year or 5-year players who are hungry, ready to get it done. You throw in Barron Sorrell at that, the jack end position, Ethan Burke at the buck end position. Anthony Hill is going to come down and rush the passer off of the defensive line, even though he's a linebacker. I just think this defensive line is the most disruptive and probably the strongest position group on the team. So I'm going to take this. E. Henry, how about you?
If you'd asked me this question prior to camp starting, I would have said leave it. I was really high on this receiving group, really high on this receiver room. But as you mentioned, you talked about A. Hill. You talked about the ascension in year 4, seemingly that contract year for AC. The entire D-line, looking at it like it's a contract year to go get paid and make some money in next year's NFL draft. You talked about Ethan Burke and Baby Bosa, right? That was even thrown out at us a little bit during camp as well. So because of that, with all of those reasons, I am going to take it.
Yeah. And let's see if they can, they missed 13 sack opportunities last year. They need to make sure they're getting the quarterback to the ground or knocking the ball out of his hands.
No doubt about it. The last take it or leave it. This is another hot one. The leading receiver for Texas, and I like how you added this, by receptions, yards, and touchdowns. You didn't just do one category. Will be X, Xavier Worthy. Take it or leave it, CB.
You know what? I'm gonna leave this because I am such a buyer of A.D. Mitchell that I think A.D. Mitchell's gonna lead in one of these three categories, maybe more than one category. Steve Sarkisian loves Xavier Worthy, and Xavier Worthy's going to get his targets. But A.D. Mitchell, 6'4", can fly. His own teammates, Brock Bowers at SEC Media Days, his former Georgia teammate, the tight end there for the Bulldogs, said, that guy's so twitchy. He's a big guy who moves like a small guy. And that's the thing that we keep hearing, is that this guy can get separation from the minute he takes off from the line of scrimmage, and that big catch radius. I just think that Quinn Ewers is going to fall in love throwing it to number 5 because every quarterback loves a big receiver, loves a big target. So I'm going to leave this, E. Henry. How about you?
I am going to leave it. And you touched on a name that I was going to touch on, but I don't want to do too much copying of your homework. So let me pivot a little bit, right? And this is something I do truly believe. Let's see how hot take this is. How about JT Sanders was leading in touchdowns? It's been talked about from the first day of fall camp. When we talked with Jeff Banks, we talked with Steve Sarkisian. They talked about the fact that JT, he might not see as many targets behind the line of scrimmage. He might not see as many tight end screens, but they're looking to get him vertical. I just love the idea of big JT Sanders, 10, 11 touchdowns. If my memory serves me correct, and again, Chip, please feel free to correct me on this. He needs 11 touchdowns to set the all-time record for a career at tight end. Come on, and it's David Thomas, right? Who has the there we go. Who has the all-time record? I see him knocking on that door, CB. So I think for that reason alone that you mentioned, he's got to lead all the categories in receiving. I am leaving it, and I'm throwing a flyer out there. JT Sanders, 11 touchdown receptions this year.
I like it. That's a hot one. That's a hot take right there. But Jatavian Sanders, man, he's capable. 54 catches last year, second leading receiver on the team by catches. And look, he should be more productive with the deep threats on the outside that they have now. Adding those deep threats helps JT Sanders, helps him get open down the middle. Helps him get matched up on a linebacker where he can just pull away. And so I like it. I can see it. All right. Hey, there we go. Flagship Podcast, Eric Henry, ladies and gentlemen. Eric, for those of you who don't know, Eric is a native Floridian. You grew up in Tampa.
That's correct.
And you attended Central Florida. You are a Knight. Welcome to the Big 12.
Absolutely.
And what else do we need to know about Eric Henry? You played college football.
I did. So just kind of a quick background, as Chip mentioned, again, went to the University of Central Florida, did not play there, played 1 year of college football at Weber International down in Florida before deciding that, hey, my future was not on the gridiron. So I might want to start developing some of these other skills, Chip. But yeah, prior to joining 24/7 Sports and Horns 24/7, I spent a year covering high school football and basketball in the greater Chicagoland area. So the only thing, Chip, in my career that has come close to the level of intensity, the passion that Horns fans have for Horns football is Chicago area high school basketball. That's the only thing that has come close. So I did that for about a year and then made the transition to covering the Group of Fives, covered Conference USA and the American, a little bit of the Sun Belt for another outlet for 5 years and covered Florida and national football as well. And got the opportunity to, again, join a great site. And I'm just been really ecstatic over these past few months to work with a great team, Chip, yourself, Jeff Howe, Jordan Scruggs, Hudson Standish, Hank South, Tommy Yarish. As I said in the intro, trying to, fill the shoes of the illustrious Taylor Estes. So thank you to her for all the help she's guided me along the way here. So yeah, I think that's it. I'm looking forward to my first year. I'm at the spot in downtown Austin. It's another lovely day here at 5th and West. So looking forward to an exciting football season, sir.
I'd be young like Eric Henry. You know what I mean? I remember those days. Hey, everybody, thanks for being a part of this one. Let's do it again next week. For Eric Henry, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Make sure you become an annual member at Horns 24/7 so that you get all the VIP content across the entire premier, preeminent 24/7 sports network. Make sure you're checking out Josh Pate on Late Kick, the YouTube channel. And of course, make sure you're subscribed. Just hit that button right there to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. And so until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.